1971 to 2006, and it was the longest-running syndicated program in television history. It was a showcase for a section of popular culture, and as such, it launched the careers of generations of musicians. If I were to run down the list, we'd all be nodding our heads in recognition. Especially, it launched the careers of those in rhythm and blues, soul, and hip-hop. Says a description of the book about the show: with its smooth, soulful tunes and groovy dance moves, Soul Train launched the careers of countless African-American artists and others, including Elton John and David Bowie, and set lasting trends in music, dance, and fashion for more than 3 decades. Its tagline, as you heard from its longtime host, was "the hippest trip in America." So hop aboard and take a ride. Now, I can't say that I was ever a huge fan of the show or ever really watched more than a few brief clips, but I think it's impossible not to know something of that groove and recognize a little of the tune. What stood out for me always were the scenes like we saw shot on the dance floor. Whenever I happened to see a bit, I always felt like I was at a school dance, curiously watching to see how people moved and which dance steps might be possible, maybe with 3 left feet, to imitate. And as at every dance, some dancers stood out for their smooth, elegant flair, and others drew attention for their bombastic, daring gyrations. It might have been the hippest trip in America, but if I had any aspirations of hopping on, I would need to follow somebody's example. Is that not also true in our spiritual lives? If we were thrust out onto the stage of our own lives and asked to find our own spiritual way, all of us would surely falter. We know well the truth of the biblical statement, "All we like sheep have gone astray." We need a shepherd. We need a dance coach. We need spiritual mentors and guides who can show us how to put into action the gospel conviction we feel in our souls. We need someone like the Apostle Paul, who says, "Join in imitating me and observe those who live according to the example you have in us." This is the power that resides within the church, and one reason why God called the church into being. One might believe the gospel privately, but faith that is not enacted is not really faith. Certainly not faith in a biblical sense. The biblical sense of faith is that faith is a verb. Pope Francis noted as much this week. For Christian faith to be operative in us, it must show in words and deeds. So for our spiritual soul to be alive, the soul train has to move. Faith must be danced and enacted. This is what Paul teaches the Philippians. Imitate me, imitating Christ. It's not imitate me for my own sake. It's I'm imitating Christ so you can imitate me and others can imitate you. Just as the Soul Train TV show didn't have just 1 or 2 dancers doing demonstrations, the spiritual Soul Train has many practitioners to watch, 2 millennia of witnesses to imitate. In this way, we learn to shape our day-to-day lives according to the example of those whose souls are moved by Christ. And this is what we hear when we turn to the Gospel of Luke. It is interesting that those around Jesus, including the Pharisees, provide a powerful witness of spiritual formation in action. They, like us, struggle at times to balance our natural inclinations with bold gospel teachings and the really bold actions of Jesus. So in that 13th chapter, the Pharisees, they've been paying attention, and they're surrounding Jesus, and they don't want anything to happen to him at this point either. They come and say, "Jesus, get away from here. Herod wants to kill you." Sounds reasonable. Sounds like a good warning. Everybody prizes safety, and if you're killed, you can't go on healing and teaching and changing people's lives. So divert that soul train and take an alternate route. But Jesus has a steady hand on the wheel of the train, and he knows where it must go. And he says, "Go and tell Herod, that fox, that sly fox, that I am casting out demons, performing cures today, tomorrow, and on the third day I will finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way. Today, tomorrow, and the next day." It's a succession of movement, like a dance or like a train. Today, tomorrow, and the next day. And the steps each day are casting out demons, restoring people to their right selves, performing cures, reuniting communities, going to Jerusalem to look Herod in the face. There's no diverting the train. There's no detour for the mission. It's straight on. And if there wasn't a detour or a diversion for Jesus, then there isn't one for us who imitate him. That's what the members of Hunting Ridge Presbyterian Church in Baltimore realized as they took a look at themselves and their city. Andrew was with a mission trip last week, and I learned this story from him. It's a very powerful one that has stayed with me. In the 50s, as their closer to the city neighborhood began to integrate, the Hunting Ridge Presbyterian Church moved out to the suburbs. Again, in the latter part of the 20th century and the first part of this century, the neighborhood was changing yet again, more diverse, more racially integrated. And they thought about what to do. But their church was highly integrated now as well. And they knew they could not move. So they looked at their neighborhood. Right around the corner from the church was a street corner that the city had deemed the most violent in the city. It was deemed unsafe, and people were told not to go there unless they had to. But of course, many people had to. They lived there. They got off the bus at that bus stop. And so the members of the church thought, what can we do? So 5 of them went and stood on the street corner. They didn't know what would happen. They didn't have anything with them. They just stood. And they did this day after day. And as they did, the same people got off the bus at that bus stop. And the same people came to get on the bus. And the same people crossed the street, and they began to have conversations. And they began to build relationships. And then they said, well, if we're standing here, why not bring some lemonade and cookies? So they brought refreshments, and they passed them out to the people on this very most violent corner where there were guns and drug deals and people going to work and coming home. And they talked, and they had conversation over those cookies and lemonade. And then they thought, well, let's have a Bible camp. And so they asked the city if they could portion off a section of the street. And they had a Bible camp in the summer and filled the street with the gospel and the good news of Jesus. And now they are working to make that an interfaith effort with the Jewish synagogue and the Muslim mosque to again bring change to that city street corner, which now is not the violent place that it was, and the drug deals no longer take place at that corner, and where people's lives have been changed. Andrew told me a story that he had been told from some years ago where there had been so many children's deaths and young people's deaths in Baltimore. And there was, as there often are along our roads, a shrine with teddy bear and flower and balloons and so on. And overheard was a little boy who said to his mom, "Gosh, I can't wait to die so that I get remembered with a teddy bear." Now, we don't know what that mom and that boy did, but I like to think that there is a good chance that they found their way to that street corner where there were Presbyterians handing out lemonade and cookies and teaching in a Bible camp and changing people's lives and changing street corners. It took 5 people to do something daring, like not divert the train, but go stand there. They didn't know what would happen, but they had courage and imitated Jesus, who had courage and persisted in his path to Jerusalem. 5 people stood, then more came, then more came. No matter what it is that we do, when we decide to take a stand, when we decide to imitate Jesus, we make a difference in people's lives because it's the relationships that form. So whether we spend a few hours sitting with Howard and June in a very stressful time for them, or spend some time as a reading buddy, helping to change a little person's life, or spend some time and money packing backpacks that go home with food for the weekend for a needy family, or whether we speak a few words of truth to someone. It doesn't take something big for God to take that effort and with all that gospel motion to turn people's lives. And as our gathering prayer this morning said, if we will dare to follow you, Jesus, imitating your act of compassion and justice, then you will transform us in grace and shelter fear-filled people under the wings of your peace. May it be so for us. Amen.